Hey, good evening, everybody, and welcome to another Facebook Live session here at the Innovative Dad. This is Dr. Ari Yaris. I'm a licensed psychologist here in Maryland and a parent coach. And we use this time every other Wednesday to talk about different parenting issues that may be facing you, challenges that you're feeling stuck by, and as an opportunity for us to explore some issues in depth and really see what we can learn and how we can make ourselves better parents, more innovative parents, and to learn from the mistakes that we make as parents, which I think is incredibly important for us to be doing. So I thought tonight's topic, maybe apropos to some of the behavior that you might have seen, and I know that I saw earlier today out of my kids, and that's whining. And look, let's be honest, folks. Whining drives us all up a wall. It is a frustrating behavior to have to deal with. It is something that we just find it to be, I don't know. It's whining. Like, it's awful. It really is. It pushes your buttons in some really major ways. And what I want to do is sort of talk about why whining happens. I got some bad news. We can't completely avoid it ever occurring. But also, what do we do when it's happening? And then maybe some solutions to really take care of it. And even some ways to sort of preempt whining. And at the end, we'll talk a little bit about whining that has sort of moved one step beyond the whine, which is, the full-blown tantrum problem behaviors. So, all right. So without further ado, let's sort of jump into this topic today. Let's talk a little bit about why whining might happen. And it really goes down to thinking about what are the functions and causes for kids' behavior. And there are a lot of these. Oftentimes when I talk to parents about causes of behavior, functions of behavior is the technical term, is that I am talking about kids either trying to get something or to avoid something. I want the chocolate bar. I want to avoid doing my homework. And it can get a little bit more complicated than that, obviously. So let's start with some reasons sort of building off of that and directly apply that to whining. So reason number one, your child might be whining at you, Mom, is because they don't have the internal resources to cope with what's being asked with them. So this is sort of a reaction to feeling overwhelmed. In much younger kids, this often moves immediately to the temper tantrum, howling on the ground sort of thing. But sort of beyond, having your basic needs met, it's, children, when they get tired or hungry or are sort of out of it, you're going to get some of that whining behavior. So another reason that whining can occur is because a child is craving connection or attention. And they move into that whining phase because you're going to start paying attention to them if they're whining at you. It is a very effective behavior, folks. It really, really is. So something to be in mind is be preemptive. Make sure that your child is getting enough of your positive attention without having to provoke it. If you preempt the whining by giving attention before they start to get demanding, you'll be in better shape. If you hark back to sort of the cartoon characteristics of a romantic relationship with somebody always asking, do you love me? Do you love me? Do you love me? You know that attention that you give is never really going to be completely filled. But if you're taking the initiative, you'll be in better shape. Now, as you start to see a child need more connection, that sort of first sign of needing more emotional support, you're going to want to jump in there and start to provide that connection and that attention. Now, I want you to think about this for a minute. You're not rewarding, bad behavior by giving a child attention when they're whining. If they're whining for hungry, would you think you were rewarding the whining by feeding them? No, it's we have a job to meet our kids' needs. So they have the internal resources to cope, and connection and that need for attention is a basic human need, and we know that kids can't function without it. So that's reason number 2 is around that need for connection, that need for attention. Now, whining may also happen because a child is lacking a feeling of power. They don't like what's going on around them, but they don't have the power to change it. So that whining and then our scolding of their whining then increases this feeling of powerlessness that they're having. So we need to sort of relax and invite them in to have their voice and increase their sense of confidence and competence, and allow them to feel that they can do things about these situations. So this is sort of like your child is whining about wanting to go to the playground, and you keep telling them that you can't, we're going to all of these stores. But if you just use a little bit of empathy and say to them, okay, well, I hear that you really want to go to the playground, and here I am stopping at all these stores running our errands, and you're really disappointed that we're not doing that. So voicing that empathy will help them. And then what you want to do is to start to promote that strong voice that they can have, giving them a sense of control over the situation. And you might say something like, you don't sound like yourself. I wonder where your voice went, your strong voice went. And you can make it into a game. You can be silly. I've talked about this in the past. Okay, where did it go? It was just here a minute. Oh, I'm going to look underneath the chair. Can you help me find it? Is it over there? Oh, you found it. Okay. And what you're going to do is to train them to use alternative tools by teaching them how to ask appropriately for something and how to negotiate with you. If whining is a function of powerlessness, giving them tools to get access to things through reasonable measures can help carry them over into the rest of their lives. And this is essentially giving them skills so that they learn that they can get what they want in life, not by whining and not by tantruming, and using other tools, by managing their emotions, by using their own empathy, and by trying to set up win-win situations. So if you can't go to the playground today, you don't, but you're empathetic about their desire, you nurture them through things, and we can see what we can do. Okay, if you really want to go to the playground, well, can we make this next errand nice and fast? Can you can you cooperate with me? Can you show me that your listening ears are working? Can you help me get you in and out of the car quickly? And what you're doing is not rewarding the whining, but empowering them by demonstrating that there are solutions that work for both of you to help you get what you want. And sometimes this will work and sometimes it won't. And that could be that the need isn't around feeling powerlessness. It's just really because there's an emotional expression that has to happen. And the idea of whining happens because there are emotions that are trying to get out that have been stopped, sort of pent up. And this could be sort of a snowball effect of emotions that are going on. So, you changed babysitters, somebody took something away from them at school, the baby woke them up. There's just a load of kind of stressful things that could be going on in a child's life. And, I would say to you that, toddlers and younger children sometimes let off stress by having that meltdown. And then as they get older, they get more self-control. And this is where the whining kicks in. You want to be kind in response and, use your empathy. If you can, put them in your lap or sit them down next to you, look in the eye and say, I notice you're feeling a bit whiny and sad. Do you need a cuddle, maybe cry a bit, talk to me about what's going on with your emotions. Everybody needs to let out that they're feeling upset, and I'm here for you. So that's reason number 4. Now, the 5th reason, surprise, surprise, kids whine because guess what? It's effective. Because at some point in the past, we caved. And sometimes we've caved bad. And we've all done it. I've done it. You've done it. we've given in and we've bought the piece of candy or the treat or whatever it was that they had. Uh, and what we want to do to sort of break that cycle is, again, respond to whatever the desire was with empathy. You're so disappointed that I said no. You really wish that you could have that toy. It means that they're feeling a little less alone with that disappointment. And there's nothing wrong with finding a distractor, something else that's going to make them happy. So shifting them over to another activity. Again, you're really trying to train them here to look for and propose win-win solutions. Because if they only get what they want by whining, well, you've just trained them to become a whiner. And then a last reason here around causes of whining, and it's whining because you'll just do anything to make it stop. And because we hate it. It pushes our buttons. And we are programmed, almost biologically, I would say, to react to whining because it is a more mature behavior of the same crying that we reacted to when our older children were little. So, in the same way that we got upset and uncomfortable with the crying, our anxiety is kicking in with the whining, and we're going to do things to help stop it because we're trying to then go meet the needs of our kids in that. And I think in recognizing that this is going on, it's we can sort of stop and understand what's happening, and I think that's really important. And as I've talked about before here and in the posts on the blog, I want to make clear that you need to stop and take a breath and remind yourself that things aren't an emergency, that you're going to feel better, you're going to parent. If you need to step away, and just give yourself a little mini timeout, that's totally okay. It's totally fine for that to be the case. What you don't want to have happen is have sort of your fight or flight instincts start to kick in, which is not helpful. Don't feel like you have to immediately jump in and solve the problem right then and there. What you really need to do is provide empathy, provide warmth, provide safety, and those are the things that are really required of you. Now, there are some other ways out there to go and preempt whining. And a lot of it has to do with the biological. And remember, I just talked about a minute ago that the nature of whining may have a biological basis to it, just in terms of way that human behavior works. So if you've noticed, there may be some trends in terms of the things going on in your child's environment that we do have the power to manipulate in our favor to help minimize some of the whining behavior. So one is to recognize that whining often occurs because the child is tired. And our days are busy, things get crazy, bedtime happens later than we wanted it to happen, and we're trying to run our lives around the ridiculous sleep schedule that we're keeping. But remember that our kids need more sleep than we do. So think about whether or not your child's sleep schedule has been consistent and if it's working well. If you see your kids starting to whine more in the early evening, before bed, it might be their way of saying they need to go to bed earlier. They need to start to wind down sooner. And sort of thinking about it, we also have to think about how we're going to make adjustments within our own schedules to make sure that our kids are getting adequate sleep. All right, another place that we have some ability to manipulate it is around diet. There are linkages between diet and behavior. It's just the reality of it, folks. Think about how you get when you haven't had your coffee in the morning. Does your behavior start to resemble the adult version of whining, or maybe it is just outright whining because you're not caffeinated? So think about where your kids are in terms of the amount of fuel that they have in their system, and train them to think about things in terms of food being fuel, and saying to you, oh, I'm running out of fuel, and I need to fuel up. And if you've got a kid that has lots of highs and lows in terms of, that they need more frequent meals instead of lots of large meals, work out strategies to make sure that you have those snacks with you to sort of head the whining off at the pass before it becomes something more severe and moves into a tantrum or an outright meltdown. And this is something to think about, particularly in terms of sugar, because that is a way of giving your child that up and down. If you are giving your kids lots and lots of fruit juice, for example, which has a lot of sugar, you may be overloading your child's systems in terms of the way that they can metabolize and handle that sugar, and they may go up and then they may come down. And when they crash from that sugar high, that the whining may be kicking in. So just really pay attention to your kids' eating habits, and I think that'll be a way of heading off some of this whining that's happening. Now, there are, of course, some common whining sort of, let's call it a wind-up that happens. We're all sort of afraid of the supermarket tantrum, the meltdown in the checkout aisle. And so things to keep in mind in terms of heading these off at the pass is that you want to, snack them, feed them before you go to the supermarket. And then while they're there, do not treat them as just additional cars in your train of shopping. You want to keep them occupied by giving them jobs and responsibilities. So, can you help me find the oranges over here? Well, I need 4 oranges. Okay, doing things like that. You may also want to not go down the aisles that have the sweets and the crunchy snacks on them, particularly if you're not planning on buying them. And you may want to work out even some sort of routine where, okay, if you're going to be my helper during shopping, then you get to pick out one special treat that you can have for lunch during the week, and then giving them some control and some power in these situations. And then another, common place for whining is the car on a road trip, because kids get bored in the car. So you want to think about, are you prepared? And this can happen not just on the road trip. This can happen, if you're dropping off 2-3 kids for carpool, that third kid, that last kid to get dropped off is going to be just a bit peeved potentially by the end of that, because they've just been stuck in their seat, or they've been yanked in and out of their seat so many times. So make sure that you have, equipped in your car some games, some toys, some snacks. Make sure that your phone has got music on it, music that's going to engage them. Plan the sing-along in the car. Just, different sorts of things to keep them active and engaged. Keep some books for them to sit and read, or a car-based toy, any of that. I think, those are all places. And then around bedtime, you will start to see some whining. And I think a great way to do that, as I mentioned before, is pay attention to your child's sleep patterns, but also, engage in a more established routine for bedtime, whether it's stories and mindfulness exercises. I'll post a link to some things that I've written about and talked about in the past about dealing with bedtime in the comments here, as a great way for you to look at some ideas to walk through the whining. And to really be preventative about it, because it is something that we can't eliminate at 100%, but we can certainly minimize the impact that whining is going to have on us. All right, so let's talk a little bit about whining that is starting to escalate and move into that tantruming. So again, first thing first, parent, take care of yourself. If you remember, when you're on that airplane, and you guys have all heard that talk from the flight attendant, what do they tell you to do in the event of a reduction in cabin pressure or a loss of airflow? That mask comes down from the ceiling, and they say, put it on yourself first. So calm yourself, take some deep breaths, take a time out if you need to, get yourself into control. Again, always then start with empathy. Let your kid know that you understand, that you're going to accept their feelings before you say or you do anything, or you do any problem solving. So, instead of how many times did I have to tell you, fill in the blank, whatever it is, you can say something like, well, I know it's hard for you to get going on that when you're distracted by, let's say, reading. Now, your kids aren't going to just respond because you've shown concern for their feelings. But by being empathetic, you're opening the door for your child for hearing what's going to happen next instead of them becoming defensive. When kids don't feel heard, it just encourages them to get louder, to lean into their tantrum. And empathy is just a much better and more effective response than over-explaining. And we tend to go to the rational because we think our kids are rational beings. And I have some really important news for you guys. Kids are not rational beings. So trying to rationalize the child is not going to necessarily win things. All right. Another thing you're going to want to do is to be calm and clear. Your kid may be lashing out at you physically, biting, kicking, screaming, whatever it is, and showing their frustration. So if we then lash out with our frustration, it's going to show our kids that, hey, bad behavior is appropriate. Like, Dad just did it. So instead, you want to calmly and firmly correct the behavior by saying things like, well, I need you to ask nicely. Please don't hit me. When you hit me, it hurts. And do what I just did right now. You want to sort of drop your voice a little bit and use a much calmer and slower pace of speech. And then if this sort of behavior, persists because they're not going and matching your tone, you can make an announcement and say, when you start using your normal voice, I will start listening to you. And then you need to do some planned ignoring, which I know is hard, but it really is effective because you're not leaning into the attention. Now, I'm also going to really encourage you. I know that we all go there. I go there as well. Is that our first instinct in this sort of situations is to engage in some punishment. And, because we want to teach them that lesson or show them, what you're supposed to be doing. And we're afraid that we're inviting them to walk all over us. And what happens when we move into sort of that classic punishment phase is that we're really doing things like shaming, blaming, and putting pain, not physical pain, I hope, but just emotional pain with the kids. And there's the learning opportunity is missed when you respond with punishment. It creates a situation of fear of us, and we don't want that. Now, it doesn't mean that your kid can go and hit, steal, or and do other things. Consequences do need to be in place, and they need to be reasonable, and they need to be delivered respectfully. And I'm a really big fan of if they can be natural as well. What do I mean by a natural consequence? I mean something that's going to happen because of the behavior. So, for example, if your child is whining or tantruming at bedtime, a natural consequence is not getting that bedtime story because you've run out of time and it's lights out already. Telling your kids when they're not playing nicely with a toy that we're going to put them away for the night and you can play with it tomorrow is going to be more effective than sending them to their room and saying, you can't play with this at all for a week. And kids are going to do better when they feel better about themselves. Now, another method is to use a strategic timeout. Now, I've talked about this before. I'm not a huge fan of timeout per se, but we do know that our kids go throughout their day with lots of things that are demanding on their limited quantities of self-control, and creating spaces to really have less stimulation. And sending a kid to go take a break can be an effective solution. And then the last thing to do to really break out of this cycle of when that whining is escalated into the tantruming is model the behavior that you want to see. Model the impulse control. If you are grabbing your device every single time that it beeps, chimes, whatever it's doing, vibrates, or if you're yelling at the other drivers in your car as you're driving around, you're demonstrating for your kids how to control your emotions, how to engage in some self-restraint, and how we respond to frustrating situations, because it's going to influence our kids in terms of how they respond to the strong emotions that they're having. So if you've just, burnt dinner, talk about it. Talk about it out loud, how you're handling that situation. It's really valuable. I think something that we need to all know and sort of take a deep breath around is that as our kids grow up, they're going to develop more self-control. and you can make a big difference along the way with that by, showing them how to engage in impulse control and modeling that. And just recognizing that our kids' brains are very much under construction, and that then limits what they have the ability to do. Okay, folks. So that's a lot about whining. Hopefully, I didn't whine too much while I was doing this. Just some basic strategies for you to walk your way through the whining, minimize it, sometimes head it off at the pass, and then deal a little bit when it starts to escalate. I'll put the notes that I mentioned as we're talking today into the comments on this post so that you can have access to them in the future. And as always, you can find me here on this Facebook page, as well as on my website, which is www.ariyaris.com. There you'll see links to all of the content that I'm creating, our regular parenting strategies to kid habits tips videos, which are short 1-minute videos that are about great strategies that you can use to build successful habits in your kids that they then own and that you don't have to support directly all the time. As well as, Twitter, Pinterest, Instagram are also great places to go find and connect with me. And if you happen to be in the suburban DC area, I am doing a workshop in a few weeks on building resilience in you and your kids. And there's information about that on the Facebook page. You're welcome to sign up and join us for that session. I'd love to have you there in person. We're going to be talking about, how do we make sure that we build up our kids? So some of the things that I touched on today will be in that, but also just some larger strategies to really help your kids build up that sense of resilience, build up that, that grit that we want them to have, but also for us to build up our own parenting grit and our own parenting resilience, which I think is incredibly important as a skill. So as always, feel free to drop me a line here at the Facebook page or via email at psych@ariyaris.com. And again, you can visit the website, www.ariyaris.com. Look forward to hearing from you. In the meantime, I wish you happy parenting and good night.